Hey there everyone, so here we are. I've got the Mobula7 that I built in the previous video, and as mentioned I will be transferring this into a HD build. So this is currently an analog build using the onboard VTX that is on the X12 Happy Model flight controller. So I will be going through and upgrading this to be HD, putting in a Caddx Vista. I won't be putting it in like this. I'll be taking this down and decasing it, taking off the heat sinks and making it a naked Caddx Vista. So I'll be putting this on to this frame here, actually not this specific frame. I've got another one here. This is the same frame but in black. Okay, I guess it's not exactly black, it's kind of like a grey, but it still looks okay, and it's a nice fresh frame that I'd like to transfer this over. So the Mobula7 analog build that I have here, I've been bashing this around quite a lot and I'm very impressed with the durability, and I think it's kind of pushing my confidence levels in taking this through the little parks and tight spaces inside the house, and I've bashed this quite a lot. So I'm surprised nothing has broken on it yet. Fingers crossed that it stays that way, but I guess for now I'll be transferring it over to this one anyway, so I might actually make another build after I've transferred all of this over to the HD build. Might get another flight controller, an X12 or maybe something smaller, to put on this frame and fly it as analog using some of my previous parts from other builds. But for now it will be turning into an HD build. I'm quite excited to do this. I've been looking forward to it and planning it in my head and researching online quite a lot. And the other person that I followed to inspire me to make this build is Dax Niel, and on Dax's channel, I mentioned in the previous video, he made this build initially and gave everyone the idea, I think, and posted it on YouTube. Nick Burns did the same thing and had Dax Niel's help as well. So I'm going to give it a go and put it together myself and make my own Mobigital. So I'm NamFam, let's get into it. Okay, so on this frame here, I will be cutting this down and making it a bit lighter. There's a few things that I'll be modifying, and based off the way that Dax built his one, I'll be following similar steps, but I'll be taking it a little bit further, and I'm changing the way that I'm going to be putting these components in. So what I'd like to do is get the flight controller mounted in here, and kind of in this area, I want it to sit below this level here. So to do that, this battery cage will have to come out, and I'm going to design a 3D printed battery mount of my own, and I'll be posting that up here so that you can see as well, and also I'll leave the STLs down in the description so you can go and download them and print them yourself if you find them useful. And yeah, that's what I'll be needing to do. So the first thing that I'll have to do here is, there are the holes here that are for the stack. I guess they're kind of like the built-in standoffs. I'll need to drill into them first, so I'll use the holes that are in here as kind of like the pilots or the guide to drill the correct holes through to the bottom here. So I'll do that now and we'll pass them through. This is what I got here actually is, I may as well explain it to you. It's a micro box of mini drill bits, and it ranges from 0.3 all the way to 1.6 millimeters, so 0.3 millimeters to 1.6 millimeters, and yeah, it has quite a lot of range of the various different sizes in there, and I've found this very useful. So I hadn't had this for, I guess, all the time that I've been doing these builds, but I thought I'll need it for this one here. But since I've got this, I've used it for so many other different things that it's quite useful. So it comes with this as well. I'll buy it together, very cheap on AliExpress, so I suggest that you go out and get one of these as well. Very handy for all sorts of different things. It has also different attachments that's built into the handle, which I didn't know, and I had to figure it out myself, for the various different size drill bits to go on the end there. So I guess you can actually fit larger drill bits as well if you like. So I'll be using this, and this is a 0.8 millimeter. That fits quite nicely in here. I just want it to be something smaller than the. I want it to be smaller than the actual screws that I'll be using that will go through the Caddx Vista. I'll go through that later when we start going through the build of putting in the stack screws. They will be the 1.6 millimeter thread M1.6 stack screws, and I'll show you that then. But for now, I only need the small screw holes, or the holes to be drilled through there. So I'll drill them through now. Alright, so now that I have them drilled through, it'll be easier for me to get the right spacing or the right position for those screws to go through. So what I'll be doing next is snipping these off. So these stack screws won't be used. There will be other long screws that I'll be using for the stack, and I'll need to cut these off now. So I'll get that. So using some side cutters, I'm going to have to cut these off. So I'll snip the ends off here. Okay, so now those are snipped off, it will be ready for the Caddx Vista to go on top of that. So the other part that I'll be going through here is cutting off this battery cage, as I mentioned. So I won't be needing this. I believe the battery cage here and the frame gives it that rigidity, but I'm hoping that once I do get the Caddx Vista in on top of here, sandwiched onto the frame at these 4 points, that it will give it that rigidity back. So fingers crossed that works. I am just guessing here, but let's give it a go. These frames are fairly cheap anyway, so let's give it a go. Let's not mess about. So let's just snip them off. Here you go. And getting it down here. And down here as well. Alright, so there you go. I've just snipped the battery cage right off, and it still has a little bit of that rigidity. It's not too bad. Not as bad as I actually thought it would be, so still okay. Okay, so now that I've cut that off, I might as well just weigh this up, see how much this part of the frame takes up and costs in weight. So I'll put that on, and it's 4.94 grams. That's okay. I guess this little thing was about half a gram. Let's check that. Just a bit over half gram. Alright, there you go. Alright, so now we have this frame prepared. There's a couple of other things we'll need to do, but I'll just show you now. I have here a pack of, there's 100 of them, 1.6 M1.6, so 1.6 millimeter thread size screws. These are 20 millimeters long, and these were the longest ones I actually could find on AliExpress. So I hope these are long enough. I've measured everything up just as an estimate, and I think it should be long enough. So fingers crossed that it does work. And at the same time, I've already prepared here 10 of them. I've got here the actual nuts as well. So these are the small M1.6 nuts. I was surprised I could find them, but I did. I'll see if I can get the link for the AliExpress item, and I'll put it down in the description below. But here we are. We do have these, and they're available online. A bit of digging around and searching everywhere for me to actually find it, but they are out there, so they do exist if you wanted to find them. So hopefully the link that I put down in the bottom still exists, and maybe in the future they won't have them in stock anymore, but hopefully there are other manufacturers that do stock them. So I'll be using these as the stack screws to hold in the Caddx Vista, the naked Caddx Vista, and also the X12 flight controller. But what I'll need to do, since they're M1.6, is drill out these holes here, where I've already just made those pilot holes, to be M1.6 as well. So using the trusty micro box, I'll go to the maximum and get the last one out is 1.6. Let's see if it would want to come out. There we go. This is M1.6. And I will put it on here and drill it through. Alright, well, I just measured that up, and I think that the M1.6 might be just a tad too big, so I'm just going to err on the side of caution. Just check it. Just going to eyeball this. Looks like it's probably a tad bit larger, a bit too large for my liking, and I'd like to drill the holes to be or at something about this right size as this, if possible, or smaller, so I can actually go bigger if I need to. I don't want to go too large and then it'll be too loose on the frame. So let's not be lazy and go for something a bit smaller. I might even try the 1.4, see how we go with that, and then we can enlarge that. If it's not big enough, we can go to 1.5 and then 1.6 if it gets to that point. So 1.4, take that one out. So even the 1.4 looks like it is just the right size of that thread, so I'll try that out. I could actually get the calipers out, shouldn't I? Maybe I'll try that. It's 1.58, and if this is not 1.4, then the microbox is not correct and not the right size. So 1.44, so there you go. I think my eyes are deceiving me, but we'll give it a go anyway. I just want to go for the smaller one, and then maybe we can push these through. So let's give it a go. Right. Finally got the 1.4 on, and we'll just drill through the back of these. Okay, so now that we've drilled them through, let's see if these will fit through, and it should do. Alright, so I think that will work. We'll have the 4 screws here that will hold the Caddx Vista in, and also the flight controller. So there we go. Alright, so we'll get on to decasing the Caddx Vista, making it a naked Vista, and then get on with the rest of the build, putting in the flight controller and the motors. Alright, so what I'll do next is actually I'll decase this, take off the heat sinks, and also get rid of the gum and goop, the blue thermal paste, and I'll show you how to do that and put it all together, I guess, on top of this. And I'll also be having some special standoff or little spacers that I'll 3D print as well. So I'll get onto that right now. So there's a lot of videos out there of people getting naked, I mean the Caddx Vista naked, tearing this down and decasing it, removing the aluminium heat sinks. And I wanted to go through and do it myself so that I can put it onto the Mobigital that I'm putting together, of course. So I'll be removing the casings and the screws and everything, and also this pololu connector. So I've just made a video about me installing this, and this just makes it easy to plug in and out of a flight controller, just like the O3 air unit. It uses the same plug, so I'll put a link up here for you to go and see that. I'll have to remove the camera as well, but yeah, we'll go through each of these steps. So I'll do that now. I'm just going to remove all of these screws. So actually I'll take the camera off first. Taking off this screw and removing this retainer clip. And just using something nice and thin, like a small screwdriver, just popping up on either end here. Very gently, it's very easy to lift it, and it just pops out. There you go. And what I'll be doing is taking these screws out now. Alright, so once the 8 screws are out, we can start to open it up a little bit, and there are these 2 there's a ribbon cable between the two PCBs, and there's one right here where there's a clip, and it's one of these plugs. And just to separate it a little bit like that, and push on either side like this. So just push it up, just wiggle it gently, and it should unclip. There you go. So that's one side, and it opens up like this. Now this aluminium here comes right off, and it doesn't have any of that thermal paste, but you'll see some more on the other sides of this board. I'll put that to the side, and you can see that I do have the Pololu JST PCB soldered here, so I'm just going to take that out. I'm just going to desolder that really quickly. Okay, so I've taken off the Pololu, whoops, just a ball of solder rolling around there. Just get rid of that. So I've just taken off the Pololu connector, and I can reuse that again later. Alright, so now that I've taken that off, I can go ahead and start removing this ribbon cable on this one as well. And we can have a look at the two pieces that we'll need to work on. So same thing as the other side of the ribbon, just lifting it up gently on either side, and it should then pop off quite nicely there. Alright, so there we go, and I'll put this over to the side safely, somewhere that I won't lose it or damage it, because we will definitely have to use that again. Alright, so I don't know which one to get onto first, but doesn't matter really. I might start on this side here with the USB-C plug. And basically what I've seen other people do is start to remove it by prying it open. So I'm just going to use something, I don't want to use something that's sharp and metallic, but I believe you can just get underneath it like this. And so I'm just using a toothpick. It seems to work, gets into the gap, and we can pry it apart. So here we go, and we can see that there's the blue thermal paste there. So I'd like to try and keep as much of this as possible, so that if I need to reuse it, I can. So I'm just going to use a toothpick and pull off as much as I can. It's almost like bubble gum. And I'll just go through and clean as much as I can here. And then we'll use the isopropyl alcohol, this one here, to clean off as much as possible using a toothbrush as well. Alright, so I'm just going to do that now. Okay, got those there. One thing I forgot to do was actually weigh up everything, so I'm going to weigh this up, putting all the pieces together without removing the blue thermal paste yet, just to give you an idea of the full weight, and then measure everything without the weight so we know what we've actually saved and putting onto the quad. So I'm just going to open this one up here. Alright, so it seems as though the side with I think it's a P1 chip, the main chips on this side, is a little bit harder to pry open. So I'm just going to have to work around the edge and see if I can get that to separate. It's much more difficult than the other pieces that I took off, but it should be okay, it should come off. Alright, there we go. So I think there's quite a bit of, there's quite a bit of thermal paste on this side since it's the main chip. And I think and also because they're flat surfaces against each other, it just had that suction cup kind of effect. But there you go. So there's the P1 chip. And we can take off this thermal paste. Alright, so now that we have all these pieces apart, I'm going to have to put it all together back, not all together, but onto my scale. Okay, so we're just going to start weighing everything up now. So I'll put all the screws back on it. Onto here. Alright, so we've got the screws on, the main screws. I'll put this screw on with the retainer clip. Also the antenna clip as well, since that's part of that. Put the ribbon cable on, and then I'll put these pieces on. So I'll put on one of the PCBs, the other one on over here, and these guys on the side here. Alright, so in total, I think that's everything. Without the camera, just the Vista itself is 19.08 grams. Okay, so now that we have the aluminium pieces off, I'm just going to work on each one of these. I might work on this one first, the one with the P1 chip. And just got a paper towel here, so I've got this ready. And also I do have the isopropyl alcohol. So I've got this from the local hardware, from the local snag shop, also known as Bunnings. And I'm just gonna open this up and get it ready. I don't need the spray part of it. I'm just gonna put this to the side. And hopefully I can get the toothbrush in. Yep, I can just. And so the toothbrush can go in. And what I've seen other people do, Dax Niel has done, is basically putting it on here liberally. And it comes off. Oh, it does come off quite easily. And it seems like it's kind of dissolving the blue thermal paste. Alright, so I'm just going to clean this up as much as possible. Okay, so one thing to note, I think, is I was a bit silly and started to get right into it a bit too much, and I think I scrubbed it and a bit of the blue thermal paste got into these connectors. So silly part on me, I think. So I'm just going to have to spend a bit more extra time cleaning these out, but just a warning to you guys that just don't go ham at it and then start brushing it everywhere, because it starts to get into these grooves here. So it's a bit difficult now for me to actually get it out, but I'm just going to be patient, spend some time and clean it all out. So just a warning. Alright, so I've got the blue thermal paste off this side of the board now. So this is where the P1 chip is, and it's cleaned off. And also I was careful enough to go through and clean out these plugs here and get all of that thermal paste that I accidentally got in there. So it's nice and clean now. There's still some in the corners and crevices of the resistors, capacitors and diodes, but that should be okay. It's still clean enough for using now. So I'll get onto the next side of the board, which is the side that has a USB-C. Fortunately, it only has one side that has thermal paste, so I'll get onto that now. Okay, so there we have it. I've taken off the blue thermal paste as much as I can, or am happy with at the moment. So there's still, like I said, some in the crevices of some of the components there, but I'm not too fussed. It's not going to add any weight or any issues there being there. And yeah, so they're both clean now and ready to be used. So I'm just going to put the ribbon cable together, put all the stack screws and also spacers as well between these two boards. So I believe that the two boards will be, I think, sitting like this to each other with the ribbon cable between them. And yeah, so I need some spacers now, so I'm going to print them out and then I'll show you in the next part when I put this all together. So what I'll do now, just if you're interested in seeing the weight of the components after taking it all apart and putting the parts that I will be using when it's all combined together and on the quad. Alright, so the side that has the USB-C port is 3.77. The side with the P1 chip is 3.88, and together these two chips, maybe I'll just stack it on top of each other. Alright, 7.65, the ribbon cable that goes between them. And together those three pieces is 8.11, which Just wondering if there's anything else that I need to put on here. I don't think so. These retainer clips I won't be using. I'll be using other parts of it and clamping it together so that it actually holds together. But I think that's all that I'll be using out of the air unit, or sorry, the Caddx Vista. And yeah, so these parts here I've taken out. So I guess that's quite a lot of savings, and 8.11 grams is pretty nice. Anyhow, I'll get on to the next part. Alright, so now that we've taken the Caddx Vista and decased it, I have put on here some tape, and this is actually Kapton tape. And the Kapton tape is actually kind of like this cellophane tape, but what's special about this is that it is rated for high temperatures and it's used in electronics quite a bit. So I have put it on here. I've cut just the right size of it to cover this area here on this side of the board, which is the USB-C side, and leaving the plug here exposed so that we could put the ribbon cable on this side. Also leaving the pads on this side exposed so we can solder the power and the signal wires, and also the holes for the outside holes for the stack screws. On this side with the P1 chip, I've put the tape here and left this plug here exposed for the ribbon cable, and then the camera plug as well exposed. So I've done that so that it doesn't have a chance of, you know, when they're sandwiched together like this, that nothing can kind of touch each other there, just in case. I don't want it to short, and also just to protect it a little bit. You'll notice that also that the ribbon cable on this side, when it's on facing this other end of the board, that it will touch these pieces here, and this kind of rests up against it. So I just don't want it to kind of short anything, and it's just precautionary, and also it doesn't weigh that much. It's just cellophane tape. So we'll give this a go. We'll put this plug on. So I'll start on this side here, and the ribbon cable can only go one way, so they've made it kind of like the male-female side. And move this out of the way, and we'll just plug this in on this side. So I'll hold it up so you can see, and it's quite easy. Just make sure you're gentle with it and line it up correctly before pressing it together. Nice and gentle, and it should click in. There you go. So that's done there. What's interesting is that it has a label here with P1 on it as well, so maybe that's what makes it easy as well, that you see that P1 there is on the side with the P1 chip. Not sure if that's, I think so. Maybe that's what they mean by P1. On here it says RF, so maybe this side is a RF side. Okay, so now we'll just have to put these together like this. I'll hold it this way so you can see the ribbon cable plug, and so that will go in like that. So I'll let go of this side and hold the ribbon itself, the plug, and squeeze that together just gently, and then it clicks in. Alright, so that's nice and firm now, and it's together. I think that's all we have to do for the Caddx Vista for now. We'll leave that to the side, and I'll get started on this one. So I'm going to start taking this apart, removing these screws, and taking the X12 flight controller out, and start moving it over to this board. I'm just going to take it out now so that I can start playing around with the sizing and also position of it on the actual frame, and working out what the size of the spaces that I need. So I've got here, these are, I've 3D printed 4mm spaces, and I'll leave the STLs down in the description so you can download it. Really small. It's fit for a, well, no, the dimensions for the hole is actually 2mm, but after printing and the actual, I guess, the dimensional accuracy of a 3D printer, it fits the 1.6 quite easily by slipping it on like that. So it slips on quite easily, and it's snug enough and firm enough to actually hold the separate the two boards of the Caddx Vista. So they're going to be sitting in like this here. So for now, I'll take out the X12, and then I'll start positioning it onto the new frame for the digital version. So I'll get onto that. Okay, so I have the flight controller out now, and I'm just gonna desolder the battery plug since it's gonna change a little bit. I'm gonna be doing the 2S, so I'll just undo this. Alright, so one of the things that we had to do when we are using an external VTX is that the X12 has a solder bridge that they've put on here, and once you remove the solder bridge you will then be able to disable the onboard VTX, which we won't be needing since I'll be using a Caddx Vista. So I'm gonna desolder that now. Okay, so the onboard VTX solder bridge is the one that's on this side here next to near the UFL. So it's that little tiny bit of solder there, and I'm just going to desolder it, and this is just from the instructions of the Happy Model website. So I'm just going to double check the image that I can see here. Yep, that's the one next to that one there, and that chip, just to be sure. And I'm just going to desolder that little bit there. So I'm just going to get in close and have a look, and just going to tap it just to wipe away it at the solder. There you go. I think I've got it there. I'll do that again up here. So just to clean it up and be sure that I can see two shiny solder pads there. So there you go. So I'm not sure if you're able to see it there. Hopefully I can zoom in on it. So what I need to do now is get on the wires for the battery. So I'm just going to use a healthy length of the wires for the battery, and this is 18 gauge wire. So I'm just going to use this just to put it on for now, and I can then lengthen it to my liking later when I actually put on the BT2 plugs for the 2S. So I'll be doing that later, but for now I'll get the wires on. Okay, the leads are ready, and I'm just gonna get the board on the helping hands here, and then also solder it on. Alright, so I have the battery leads on now. I think that's a good connection there. Without bridging anything. Okay, cool. So I have these on, and I'll be putting that on with the BT2s later. So for now, let's get on to a bit of wiring for the Caddx Vista itself. So I've got these wires here, and I'll be using them to put on the power, so the ground and the 5, or actually not the 5 volt. This is going to be straight from the battery. So I'm going to be, since it's a 2S and the Caddx Vista handles 2S voltage, I'm going to wire it directly to the battery. So I'll be wiring it up to the other side of the terminals on the flight controller, and I'll also wire up the T1 and TX1 and RX1 for the UART1 that I'll be putting the flight controller onto. So I believe on the flight controller here is on this side, there's the TX1 and the RX1 over here. These ones right next to this rubber grommet. So I'm just going to take that out, make it easier for me, and I'll use some helping hands to hold this up, and I will solder to those pads there. I'm just going to double check the wiring diagram. Yep, so the one on the outside is a TX1 and the one on the inside is RX1. So I'll be wiring those up, and also, as I said, the power to the Caddx Vista is from here, and also the ground here as well. So I'll get onto that now. Okay, so just tinning up these pads. Right, so the TX1 and RX1 are tinned up and I can wire them up. So I'm going to designate the yellow one as TX and the one that is the white one as RX. So I'm just going to wire them, and I'm going to be facing them going into the board. Okay, so RX is on and the TX here. Okay, alright, so that's RX and TX, and I'll do the power as well. So the battery on this side here, I might give that a bit more solder actually. Try not to give it too much heat, because then on the other side the battery lead will just fall right out. So just going to try and tack this on as fast as possible. Yep, and there I go. And same with the ground as well. So I'm just going to try and add a bit more solder to this without heating it up too much. And then trying to tack this on the top here. Alright, so there we go. Just going to visually inspect that off the camera, just so I make sure that the connections are good. The connections are alright, and I can move on to the next part. Alright, so I'm just going to put this onto the frame now. So I'm just going to put it this way. I would like the front of the actual drone to be this side here. I don't know why, but I just want these two things here, these extra tabs, to kind of protect on crashes head on, and also the camera will be sitting quite a bit forward, so these won't be in view anyway. So I'm just going to put in the stack screws, and they're mounted from the bottom, so I'm just going to take this out for now and put in the stack screws. So from underneath, these are the 20mm M1.6 screws. Alright, so I did mention at the beginning of the video that I wanted to try and get the flight controller underneath these plastic bits here, so on the bottom side of the frame, but after measuring everything up, I found that it was a little bit too low, so it was exposing the motor terminals and also the USB-C port a little bit too much, and I just worry that if I do crash and hit something, that it would actually damage these or even the components down here and also the USB plug. So I didn't want to do that, so I'm just going to mount it on top the way that Dax and Nick Burns did. However, for my build, it's going to stand up a little bit taller because I do have the Express LRS, oops, so you don't see it there, the Express LRS ceramic antenna there. So I'm just going to have to deal with it. It's going to have to sit a bit taller, but that should still be okay. So I'm just going to put this on this way. Alright, so we have the flight controller in, and the way that I wanted to mount the Caddx Vista is for the P1 chip to sit on top. And the reason for that is I want the airflow to be flowing across the top of the P1 chips, which produce the most heat. And I didn't want it to be facing down, which is how I think Nick Burns had it. But he seems to not have any heat issues, but I just wanted to be a little bit more cautious and have that sitting on top there. So let's give that a go. I'll put on the bottom side, which is the USB-C. And the best orientation I had that in was for the USB-C to be pointing out this way here. So with the front of the quad going that way, I'm just going to put this down this way. Actually, before I do that, I forgot. I have spacers that I had made. I've printed these out. Here are some spacers, and these spacers I've made separate to these ones here. These are just, I think, just straight through spacers. This one has a bit of a flare on them, so these fit the 1.6 stack screws quite well, and yeah, they are made out of TPU. So I'll be using these ones with the flare at the bottom because they will be squashing onto these little gummies here, and yeah, they just work a little bit better. So I'm just going to put these on here. Right, so I have them in, and the bottom side of it with a USB-C here on the bottom on this side here, just placing that on top. Alright, so that just gives enough room for everything under there. And the way I wanted to wire these, because I need these wires to be soldered onto these pads over here, so I'm going to pass them over this way. So they're just going to come around this side, out on the side here, and under the ribbon cable, just on this side here. So I'm going to have to line them up so that it doesn't bulk up too much. And then solder them on. So I'll try and do that now. Now that I have the power wired up to the Caddx Vista from the battery terminals, I'm going to put in the RX and TX, which is the yellow and the white. So the yellow one that I wired up earlier is on the TX, which goes to the RX, and the RX from the flight controller goes to the TX on the Caddx Vista. So this being the TX on the flight controller goes to RX, which is the one next to ground, and the one that's next to that one would be the TX, which is the RX from the flight controller. So I'll wire that up now. Should just pop this off. So I have all of them wired up now, only the 4 that I need, and then the top of the Caddx Vista, the P1 side, can go on top of that. Now I've got to be a little bit careful here because I do have this plug for the camera to be plugged in, and I'll do that now because I'm going to have to put double-sided tape on this side to press up against this connector here with the camera, and the camera's here, and you'll see now that I do have a TPU printed part for it to hold on to the frame. I'll explain this in a little bit later, but for now I'm just going to plug this in because we're going to have to be able to get the double-sided tape on so we can retain this clip here, the plug, sorry, I should put this in. So that's how the camera plug goes in. And I'll put the ribbon cable back onto this side of the board, which I think is this way here. So just pressing down, they clip in. Yep. Alright, so that's how it's going to be sitting with the wires underneath that ribbon cable. And then on this side is where the camera cable is going to go. So the camera plug on this side is going to be against this section of the bottom board. So I'll just demonstrate and I'll put it down like this. And that's how it's going to sandwich down. Okay, so you can see, I'll try and show you, if I lift this out of the way, you'll see that there's a gap here that exposes the camera plug, and that can easily dislodge. So I'm going to put double-sided tape just along the bottom part here, maybe a few layers, just to reach the top here so that it presses up against it when we sandwich it all together. So I'll try and do that now. I will also put in these spacers as well. These are 4mm, so I'll put them in. Alright, and I'm going to have to put on the double-sided tape, so I'm going to use this double-sided tape here. Just going to cut a couple of small strips. I'm just going to try the first one just to see if I get the right length. Yep, I'll put that one down there. What I'll do is I'll also peel this one and stick the other one on top so that it holds it quite nice and tight and makes it one piece of double-sided tape. Okay, so hopefully that one holds there. Cut another strip. I might need 3, but we'll just trial it out first, see how we go. Okay, so there's the second one, and I'm just going to put the board on top just to see if it actually holds it. It's touching it at the moment, but I don't think that's a firm enough pressure that's going to hold in that clip. So I'll be putting a third layer on there. So the third layer, I'll leave the red sticker on it. I'll take this top second one off. Okay, so I have 3 layers of that now, and it should be enough to hold it down. But before I do press it down, I'm just going to clip on the other side of the ribbon cable. So just holding it there. And clipping that in. Alright, so that's in. I'm just checking the double-sided tape again. And that's now pressing firmly on there when I sandwich this. So it's going to hold in quite nicely, and that camera plug shouldn't come out. Okay, so now that we have that on and we can start putting together, I guess this is the camera TPU mount that I've printed. I'll leave the STLs down in the description so you can download it, but I've gone through a bit of a design process, trying to mimic the one that Dax Niel had and also Nick Burns, but I couldn't find the one from Dax Niel on his video, so I decided to just design it myself. So you can download this one, or you can use Dax's one as well. I think it's just about the same. I've just tried to make it the same. So it does work, I think. I've just tried to play around with it, and I'm just going to route the camera lead over across like this, and it's going to hold in down like this. So I'm just going to put everything together and then you can see the end result afterwards. I do have also these other TPU printed covers that are going to cover the Caddx Vista. So this one design, and I do have another design here as well. I thought I didn't like how the Caddx Vista was all exposed at the top here. I know that Dax Niel and also Nick Burns had it all exposed because they wanted it to keep it ultra light, but I'd rather have a bit of durability, make sure that I don't damage it, and be able to use this for a long term. And just something like this is about 1 gram. It's going to give it a little bit more durability, resistance from damage, crashes and stuff, and it won't save it from everything, but at least it gives it some, you know, some protection on it so we don't scratch it up and damage the PCBs here. So I'm going to be using that to put on top, and yeah, I'll be putting everything together and I'll explain it afterwards. Okay, so now I've put all of the TPU parts onto this. I've got the camera mount here at the front, and I'll show you how it's kind of mounted on here and screwed in. I also do have the protector of the Caddx Vista on top here as well, and it protects it from the sides, as you can see here. And also you can extend the length of this TPU here to change the camera angle. So I've kind of just bodged it a little bit here, and I've made it so that there's a slit here that I could put this tail end of the top part of the canopy through the back under here, and then that's fixed underneath this part here. So there's a bit of a bodge. I might redesign this piece at the top here so that there are 2 open gaps here that allow it to pass through the underneath just the way it is here, and then come out over here so that it can be screwed. So that's just one thing I've kind of modified because I'm a bit lazy to reprint another piece. Just going down the stack here, so we have the TPU pieces that are separating the boards. So this top TPU piece is separating the top board of the P1 chip of the Caddx Vista and the bottom PCB of the Caddx Vista here with the pads. So that you saw earlier, I've already soldered that on. And then underneath that board, there's this spacer here that separates it from the flight controller. And as you can see here, just enough room to separate it from the ceramic antenna of the ELRS. I've also plugged in just a dipole antenna, a whip antenna to the Caddx Vista. I want to try that out. It's a little bit lighter than the one that came with the Caddx Vista. The reason why I wanted to do that obviously saves, I think, about 2 grams. This little whip antenna is very light. This one, it also is a little bit too long as well, and I'd have to modify that quite a bit. And I just, yeah, can't be bothered at the moment. But if I do have poor range using this antenna here, which I don't intend on flying very far with this quad. So if I do have poor range, you know, maybe 50 meters, 100 meters is probably the extent that I'll be going to with this thing. But if I do get some poor range with it and lose signal, then I'll probably try and get this one on there. I might make another video of upgrading and improving on my build that I have here. So on the underside, so the bottom part of the camera mount, it goes through the little gap of the frame here. So similarly of the gaps that are on the sides here and back here as well, there's one at the front, and I've made it so that it is wide enough that it holds quite firmly inside there. It does come down here with these adjustable holes as well, just so that I could figure out the correct distance, and I found that the 3rd hole here was the right one, and it does mount to the bottom of that stack screw that comes out the bottom there. So to adjust the camera angle at the top here again is basically undoing this, and I can pull and slide this tab and it will change the camera angle at the front. Just going down to the battery mounts here, I've printed it out and it actually holds 2 batteries, 2 1S batteries, and in this case I'm using these Tattoo 300 milliamp hour 1S high volt batteries, and I'm just about to try and solder the BT2 connectors on, but I'll show you that I'll be mounting it on like this. So I'll have to, I think, have it as the label on the bottom one pointing up, and there's a reason for that. I want the negative terminal, which is the round side, round is ground, to be pointing that way. So I'll push this one in, and then I'll get the top one with the positive terminal pointing to that side there. So I have to have the labels pointing in towards each other. So I'll slide this one in like that, right? Okay, so they're going to be sitting in like that, and on this side here, see how the ground is right next to the ground there, and also the positive is next to the positive terminal of the BT2. So I do have the BT2 plugs here that I'll be using, and just to put it on for size, and just got to be careful putting this onto the battery without any protection on it. I'm just going to be careful not to put any metal parts near here or the batteries together, because then I could short that. So just putting this one on here just for sizing. I can do it like that. And so I'll be soldering this black terminal, the ground, onto this tab here. I'll be soldering the red one onto this side here, and then I'll be using another piece that I'll probably steal from here, a shorter piece that will solder from this terminal here, which is the positive terminal of the battery that's on the bottom, to the terminal over here, which is the ground. So the positive of the bottom one to the ground of the top one. So that will complete the circuit and make it a 2S battery. So I'm going to get onto that now, start soldering that up, and then I'll do the heat shrink trick on top of the battery connector here for these two. And yeah, then we'll probably get the motors on right after that, which is the last part, and then plugging them in on the bottom side here. So I'll get on to wiring up the battery terminals. Alright, so I won't be soldering on the terminals with the batteries on, so I'm just going to measure the wires up, and I'll need to measure it up so that there's enough room for me to stretch it out, plug it in, and I'll take the top one off for now, and I'll measure the bottom one. So I'll pull the plug out, a little bit hard. Okay, so just knowing that the ground side would have to be on the round side is on the ground side, so I'll just need to make sure that I'm able to plug it in when everything's all put together. So I need at least about that much room to be able to plug it in, maybe a bit shorter, but I don't want to go too short, just to make it easy and comfortable to plug it in. So I'm just going to have it like that, and with that on the side, I'll know that I'll need about that much slack. So I'll cut it off here. Try not to touch the terminals even though it's not plugged in yet, but I'll need about that much there. So I'm just going to take that off, and then I'll be able to solder that on there. So I'll get onto that, and then at the top one, just while I'm here and snipping it, I'm just going to measure up the top one, which is the positive terminal. So I'm going to rest it up against like that, and I'll need to be able to plug it in that way. So about that much room will do, and I'll hold it up against the battery lead and snipping it off here, giving me a bit extra so that I can bend it in and solder it on. Okay, so now that I've got them lengthened up, I can take the batteries out. Again, these battery mount TPU pieces, I'll put the STLs down in the description below. Okay. Just one thing I forgot to mention was I can actually snip this off now. I don't need it to be that long. I'm going to leave it with the extra 1, 2, so maybe 2 extra holes. I don't need all of the rest of here, so I'm just going to snip this off just to clean it up a bit, clipping the corners off just to make it nice and neat. There you go. And then the bottom one as well, I might snip that off because I don't need it to be that long. Alright, okay, so here I've got the BT2 terminals, and I'll just trim this up and start tinning them up. So I'll take about 2 millimeters of the silicon off, just to expose a bit there. Alright, so I'm just going to prepare the terminals as well. I think this one I've got enough for a previous one. So I'll use the helping hands just to hold this up. Clean off the terminals because I think there's old solder on there. So I'll need to solder this on like this. And I'll give that a go now. I might have to use the helping hands again. Okay, so the round side, just to make sure, is on the ground. Get this down a bit. And I'll try and solder this onto this side here. Okay, so that's all I'll need. It looks like it's a nice connection there. And I'll get onto the positive terminal now. So I'm just going to check that, make sure that it's a nice piece of solder there that's holding it together. So that's how we'll be plugging it in. Now, getting onto the positive side, we'll do the same thing. I might have to tin this up actually, and before I do, I'm going to have to turn these terminals out. Sorry, not these terminals, these tabs. I think I showed it in a previous video. I like to turn them out so that the flat side is on the facing outwards. Okay, I've straightened them out and the flat sides are pointing out now, and I'll start tinning that up. Alright, so again, similar to the negative terminal, we'll move this up a bit. Just going to solder this one on. Right, so that should do it. I'll just check it off camera, make sure that it's a nice connection. Yep, that's a decent connection, should be okay. And they're going to be facing like this. So as I mentioned, I'm going to have to solder a piece of wire between this terminal here, the positive of the battery on the bottom, to the negative terminal at the top. So I'm just going to use an offcut of a piece here, maybe 2 centimeters worth, and I'll just loop it so it's like that, so it's easier to manage. So I'm just going to go like that. Might need to put a little bit of heat shrink on here as well, so while I solder it on, and just makes it easier and cleaner. So take about 2 centimeters and trim off some silicone off the end and tin them up. Alright, so here, I'm just going to solder this one on here, making sure I don't bridge the 2 terminals. I'll just make sure that it solders nice and cleanly there. Yep, that should be alright. It's a bit hot, forgot about that. Oh, the wire is short and it's going to hold a fair bit of that heat. So I'm going to put a bit of heat shrink on that now. Right, and shrink that up. And on the other side, I'm going to have to put a bit of that heat shrink on. Okay, so I'm just going to slip this over now, making sure that the wire is not too hot. Otherwise, the heat shrink will shrink before I even get to solder anything. Okay. So I'm going to try and turn this around. It'll be hard to get the heat shrink around, but I'm going to have to solder it onto that terminal there. So making sure that it's in the right orientation like this hopefully it's easier. Okay. See if that will fit. That should be okay. So I have that on, and I don't have any of the black in that size anymore, so I'm gonna have to use a clear one. That should be okay. I'll use the clear one for the black side and take off about that much. Putting this over here just temporarily, so that then I can slide it over to the other side. Alright, so back again, gonna try and solder that terminal back on. Okay, so I'll try and slip the heat shrink over. I think it's shrunken a little bit already, but I should be able to slide it down. Yep. Okay, so that heat shrink is on. Just going to lightly heat it up just to shrink a little bit of it, so I can get the clear one over this side as well. So give that a go. Alright, so now that I have that on, I can heat shrink all of that. And we have a nice clean connection. So now we have this whole terminal here that can plug in the two 1S batteries, and hopefully we can get the quad powered up. So I'll get the batteries on, like I said, with the labels facing inwards to each other. Gotta plug this battery in, and then the other one facing down, so I'll plug that one in. Okay, alright, so I won't be plugging these in yet, but here I just show you that I can reach around here and plug them in so they are the right orientation, and it should create a 2S battery for me to power this up with the 2S. But before we do that, I'm going to get the motors on, so just wanted to demonstrate that this is how it will connect. Okay, so here we are. The last step is to get the motors off the previous frame and put it onto this one here. So I'm just going to get onto that now. Alright, so there we go. We have the build complete. Motors are on and the whole stack and everything. Battery plugs. And now I guess is about the time that I start to test this thing out and put a battery in. So a bit of a scary feat at the moment. I don't really have that much to be able to test it. The connections that are there look like they're pretty solid. So let's give it a go. We'll put the batteries in. So stickers, labels facing up. And this label facing down. Right, so plugging in one of these shouldn't boot it up since it's not connected in a full series circuit. And then the top one should power it up, and this is a 2S flight controller. I'm just reminding myself there, and hopefully everything should be okay. So let's hear the build up tones. There we go. And fingers crossed no smoke comes out of this. I can see that the Caddx Vista LED is lit up as well, so it's red and it's gone green. So it seems to be all connected now. Looks alright, and no smoke so far. Alright, so I'm going to try and get the goggles to get the video out of this, see if that works, and also get my controller out and see if it actually has link to this flight controller. So I'm going to unplug and just do all of those testing now. So here's one of my first flights, and it powered up quite fine. It didn't have any issues. The flight controller did what it needed to do, powered up, and also the Caddx Vista is also powered up with the power of the 2S as well. It works quite well, doesn't have any issues, doesn't have any brownouts or dropouts of the video. So I didn't have any issues with the heating of it as well. It seemed to hold up quite well. If I did leave it on the bench, or if I powered it up and left it there for about 30 seconds to a minute without flying, then it shows up onto the goggles the overheat warning as the Caddx Vista would start heating up. It does get warm, but doesn't have any issues if you start taking off straight away. So here's just a bit of sample footage flying around a small park that I had, and it works quite well. You'll notice that the megabits per second starts to drop even though I'm not flying far away from myself, and that's because of an issue I found with the antenna that I installed. So it actually had the end of the antenna, the exposed part of the antenna that actually is supposed to be working or does the job of transmitting the signal. It was severed, so I've replaced it now and it works quite well with that little whip antenna. And I've also tried it with the little circular polarizing antenna of the Caddx Vista as well, but I didn't see that it had much of a difference in the short range that I flew. So I have tested this out, and it does take it flies about 100 to 200 meters without any issues, and with a quad like this I don't really intend on flying that far anyway, so you know, just around a small park like this is a lot of fun. And since this antenna that we're flying around here, you'll the reception does drop out a bit and you see it go into the focus mode, and it does still work. It doesn't have any issues here, but it does lose a bit. So you can see a bit of a yaw washout there, so that's typical of a tiny whip or whip that has a bit of weight to it, and it does lose a bit of that ability to maintain. Anyway, so here we are in the backyard of my parents' place and just ripping it around, testing it out. It doesn't have the agility or that quick snappy move of a 65mm Mobula7, but it does do quite well, so I'm able to push it around quite a bit. And with the Mobula7 V3 frame, it has been holding up quite well, so it's still very durable even with the extra weight of the Caddx Vista in there and smacking it around on concrete and everything. I haven't had any issues with it in terms of durability, and it works quite well. Don't really have any concerns with it damaging anything, especially with the TPU that I've printed that covers the Vista. And here we are, we're just doing a bit of acro in the backyard, so it does all right. It's not as agile as the analog version. The analog version was quite nice, and I do like the difference in terms of the different weight with the analog. Of course, you don't get the nice video feed like this, but it does perform a little better in taking corners and sharp moves. You do notice that difference, but with this, I do like just having that crisp, nice image, especially with the goggles too. Bit of durability testing there. Alright, so there we have it. This is the nxp200 version of the Mobigital 7, and it flies quite nicely. I really like it. It does have the great, I guess, HD footage of the Caddx Vista, and I do get that DVR recording through the goggles, and it looks quite nice, as you can see in the test flights there. So I've bashed this around quite a lot, as you can see from the scuffs and grass and all these scratches on the frame, but it hasn't broken yet, and I hope it stays away. That I have really pushed this and taken no care to keeping this thing from breaking, and it still holds up quite nicely. Nothing else has broken on it. Caddx Vista is nicely protected in here, as is the camera, except I've had to print out a new version of this where there's more of a hood on the end here, if you can see it, and I have scratched the lens already. You can see it in here, a couple of scratches on the lens, but fortunately the lens for the Caddx Vista can be replaced quite easily, so I've purchased that, ordered it, and I think it's like 18 Australian dollars. So it should come in shortly from AliExpress, and I can swap that out to a new fresh lens. Even though it has scratches on the lens here, it still works quite well through the goggles, and I can't really tell. There's a slight bit of hazing on it. If I really look at the image and worry about that, it does kind of come through the lens and the footage, but it's not too bad. It's still usable. So as mentioned before, the antenna that I was using before that was on here, it had severed, so I don't think you can see it through here, but there is a clear heat shrink on top, and the antenna wire underneath here has actually severed from the connection, so that stopped working. So some of the footage that you saw there was flying without an antenna at all. So I've realized that, and I noticed that the range was getting poor, so I swapped it out for a new one here. I did try out this antenna, which came with the Caddx Vista, and this is a circular polarizing, and I found that this one actually performed just as well as this. So this one weighs about a gram or so more than this one, so I'm just going to keep this one on here, and for the flights that I do, it does perform quite well. So I think that's pretty much it. The only other thing is that I've also designed and printed this, and this is to go on the battery, so I'll show you that now. So here are two 1S batteries, and I like to print this out, and this is just a cover just to go over the batteries like this, because covers are really good. Putting covers on things, I've noticed in my life, is it does save you from bad things happening. So putting a cover on this, it's quite nice. It protects the battery in this case, where if I put it into the frame, you'll see if I put it under here, the battery does protrude at the front bottom of the frame, and when you do crash or actually come in quite hard in a landing, this part actually starts hitting into the ground, and I've noticed that batteries die a lot faster when you start damaging the battery from this end, and I've had the battery just lose holding voltage, or it sags a lot more when they start getting damaged from the front here, and I believe it's because the layers of the cell is orientated this way. So crushing this starts to short some of those layers, and then it causes the battery to start failing. So with this cover, putting it on here, I haven't had any issues, and causes it prevents actually the battery from getting damaged on that end, and this does get a few scuffs on it. One other thing I've also designed as well along with that is I'm going to replace this one here with an integrated version of it. So this will be replacing that part there as part of the battery mount, so I don't have to have this one laying around having to take it off and forgetting to put it back on and so forth. So this one's just going to replace it there. Whoops, this one's right there. Hey, so Future Nam here, and I just wanted to tell you about the battery life that I'm getting out of these two 1S 300 milliamp hour cells, and I'll be getting about 3 minutes to 3:15 minutes kind of area. So that's with me punching it around the house or in the backyard. That's the kind of flight times that I am getting, and it does quite well. So the weight is what I wanted to keep down, so that's why I use these 1S 300 milliamp hour cells. I could buy other cells that are around that as well as 2S, but I do like to use these 1S ones because I do have other whips that run on 1S, and I still want to run them as well. So I get to use these on a 2S build like this with their two BT 2.0 plugs and using two cells, or one cell if I need to on the other rigs. I do charge these batteries to 4.35 volts, and I run them down to about, when resting after the flight, about 3.5 or 3.6, and I still get that 3-minute flight time. Sometimes I do go down to 3.4, but it does bounce back up close to 3.5. Of course, I forgot to mention the weight of the quad after building it. So without the batteries, the all-up weight dry is 44.77 grams, and that's a little embarrassing given that Nick Burns and Dax Niel, they got it to about sub 40 grams, but this still works. I still find that the motors, being 13,500 kV, 1102s, they provide enough power to actually lift this quad. So with the two 1S batteries, making it the 2-cell battery, it's 61.01 grams. So I think that's about it. That's my build. I hope you liked it. This is just something that I've wanted to do, and also, you know, I wanted to fly this around with the goggles too, and the Caddx Vista, and it flies really nicely. I really love this, and I will be flying this a whole lot more. And it's kind of my go-to. It's not kind of the agile Mobula7 65mm frame kind of flight, but this one does have that nice feel, getting a nice footage, and also for the DVR and everything as well. So I hope you liked it. I hope you learned something, or at least found it interesting in some way. So leave any comments down below, anything that I could have improved, or any ideas that you have. And also let me know if you wanted to build one yourself, and let me know how you go with that. And yeah, so that's all for today's video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.